Welcome to video 4. In this video, we're going to go about cutting out the through holes that will fit our button features. Our buttons are going to be aesthetic placeholders only, and that's not fully modeled out because this is an introductory video designed to get you using Modo's modeling tools. However, I think you're going to find yourself quite equipped to handle these kinds of modeling challenges by the end of this series. We've got a number of through holes to cut for our button features here. Each are a little bit different and each present a slightly different challenge. Now, real talk, I have to admit that SolidWorks and other parametric modeling softwares can be better at cutting through holes in 3D models. However, things are a lot better than they were before. I certainly remember the first time I followed instruction on how to cut a circle shape out of a square box, and I almost quit right then and there. But for me, the ability and freedom Modo has offered me in modeling is well worth the difficulty of a few cuts here and there. If this isn't good enough for you, there is a plugin you can get from the Foundry called PowerSubD NURBS, which is a must-have, and it'll allow you to export your models as, I'll save this into the content, into the export that's already there. You can save it as a .sat, which you can then open up inside of SolidWorks, and you can cut away the old-fashioned way, like so. Now, this model looks a little bit blocky in SolidWorks because I would have normally subdivided this a little bit more before exporting, but you get the idea. All right, before we go any further, I'm going to save as and save this into the video 4 content folder. I'll version up to version 2. Yep, that sounds good. All right, we have a number of through holes to tackle here. I'm going to start with this LED light in the front. It's got a radius of 2.5 millimeters. Let's go to a front view. Now, instead of going into a wireframe mode, which is fine, I'm going to go to the shading tab up here in the items tree. Bear with me, we haven't covered this, so just do as I do. We'll cover this kind of stuff later on. Select the base material, which is the material that's being applied to all of the geometry in the scene at the moment. We'll go to the material trans and set the trans amount to 30%. So now we can see through our polygons a little bit to be able to see our reference images, so we don't have to keep going back and forth between wireframe mode and default mode. This is just a personal preference. If you don't mind switching back and forth between wireframe and default, go right ahead. So pop back into items mode. You'll notice that now that we're back in items mode, we can still see the parameters for the material. That's because they're both still selected at the same time. So you can just control-click to deselect that material. And now you see the proper parameters for the selected mesh layer. The other thing I'm going to do is just turn off the grid for now because we don't really need it. So I'm going to hit Control-1 and then go Toggle Grid Work Plane. There we go. I like a nice clean view of what I'm working on. So front view, zoom in, grab this vert, and let's move it into place. Kind of just eyeball it to the middle. Just about there. That looks fine. Spacebar to drop the tool. Hit B for bevel. So before we did edge bevels to create nice fillets and chamfers. That's what happens when you bevel an edge. Now we're going to bevel a vertex. And what that does, and I'll click and drag in the 3D viewport, is it creates a new polygon. Make sure your round level is at 0, by the way. Hit spacebar to drop the tool. Now, our new polygon isn't particularly round or nice looking at all, so we have to fix it up. So we need to give it some more edges to work with, and we need to make sure that that fits within our shape. So I'll hit C for cut. Make sure you have multi-slice turned on, and I'm just going to put a supporting inline edge here for now. Spacebar to drop the tool. All right, C for cut. You could just hit Shift to reactivate the tool, actually. So let's cut here, here, and then bring this down here. We're going to link this up later on. Hold Shift and click to reactivate the cut tool here to here. Shift click from here to here. And let's bring this all the way around over here and down here. And again, we'll link this one up, these edges up later on. And then let's just join these edges here. So kind of just redirecting the poly flow or the edge flow. Edge flow and poly flow is something that it's just something that you get better at from practice for starters. And also if you model for too long in one session, at least this happens to me, when I finally do go outside, I start analyzing the edge flow in the cracks in the pavement. It just like, it will take over your brain. So if you can't figure out how to fix your edge flow to get quads, it'll just come with time and practice. All right, so grab this central polygon here and go to the radial align tool. Click once inside the viewport to activate the tool. Make sure you have an angle of 0. I'm going to set the radius to I'm going to set the radius to 3 millimeters. Even though the radius calls for 2.5, I'm going to set it to 3. Hit spacebar to drop the tool. Let's just move that vert out of the way. Give it some room to breathe. And center this a little bit. The reason why I set the radius to be bigger than what is called for is because I want to create a bit of a buffer, a padding of geometry to support this when it becomes a through hole. So now I've selected this polygon, I hit B for bevel. So B for bevel, click once inside the viewport to activate the tool. This is a poly bevel. So we've done edge bevel, vert bevel, now we're doing poly bevel. They all work a little bit differently. And you can see that the poly bevel comes with 2 familiar tool handles and move tool handles, move things, and square tool handles, scale things. Well, we just want to scale these polygons in by exactly 1/2 of a millimeter. So now it is the right dimension. Spacebar to drop the tool, Control X to cut those polygons, N for a new mesh layer, Control V to paste those polygons, and let's call this LED. Enter. Great. Go back into the body mesh layer. The next thing we're going to do is this slotted hole for the ports, which is on the right side of our product. But as it stands, we don't have enough geometry to define this shape. We definitely need to add more edge loops running this way. So let's grab 2 adjacent polygons, or you could grab 2 adjacent edges, it doesn't matter. Hit Alt-C to activate the loop slice tool with a count of 2 and a uniform mode. You just have to click once inside the viewport to activate the tool, and then you can hit spacebar and then click anywhere in the 3D viewport to drop the selection. Do the same thing, grab 2 edges that are adjacent, Alt-C, click once inside the viewport, spacebar, click outside to drop the selection. Now we have enough geometry to work with. So from a right view, select, well, we're going to use these 8 polygons to create this shape, but for now just select these top 4 around this area here and activate the radial align tool. Click once to activate the tool. We're going to set this to 4.5 millimeters, like so, and make sure your angle is set to 0. Spacebar to drop the tool. Do the exact same thing here. Radial line, click once, set this to 4.5, enter, spacebar to drop the tool. Now I'm going to delete these edges and these edges, delete and delete these edges as well. I oversized this because we're going to create that same padding of supporting geometry, but right now my geo is not in the right place, and I would not advise scaling this polygon to get it in the right place. You're going to mess up the shape of your round, as you can see. Instead, what you need to do is move the verts. So we're going to lasso select with a left mouse click these verts, and let's just move them up a little bit, like so. Grab these ones, move them down a little bit, like so. And now we can bevel this polygon. We already have the 1/2 of a millimeter dimension punched in here. We can just apply it. Spacebar to drop the tool. That looks good. Cut those polygons. N for new mesh layer. Control V to paste the polygons. And let's call this ports. Good time to save. Control S. All right. Now let's do the volume slider, which will be made in a very similar fashion, but a little bit differently. Go back to the body mesh layer. Let's go to a left view. I'm going to use these polygons and these polygons to make the top and bottom of our volume slider. And unlike the port through hole, I can run the radial line on both of these at the same time because I have this buffer in the middle. So otherwise it would have just made an enormous circle from all of those polygons. So here it's going to make two separate ones. So like so, and we know we have a dimension that we need to work with here. So we know this has a radius of 3.5 millimeters. So let's set this to 4 so we can have our buffer. Make sure your angle is at 0 and hit spacebar to drop the tool. All right, so these edges right now are kind of skewing our shape. It's kind of bending around this circle, and I do want it just to be a straight slotted hole. So I'm going to grab these edges, delete them, delete these ones, and delete these edges. Now I can take this polygon, B for bevel. We still have the right parameter punched in here. Just hit apply, spacebar, Control X, and for a new mesh layer, paste the polygons, and we'll call this volume slider. Okay, go back to the body and let's relink these edges here. Like so. Great. So the next thing I want to do is the screen in the front. This one should be easy, but first let's relink these edges that we started. So C for cut. I'm going to go to a front view and click all the way down to here. Again, this is great with multi-slice. And from there to there. Okay, so let's grab this edge, hold the up button till here. R for scale, making sure negative scale is turned off, and we'll just scale this so that it's straight. And then here to here, all the way up until this line here. That's good enough. Scale this one straight. That looks fine. I'll delete these edges. I don't need them anymore. Now, these edges are going to make up the sides of our screen here. So we need to scale them in. I'll turn off snapping. Right, but I want to make sure, of course, that this is in the middle. If there's unequal padding on either side, then our screen will be off-centered, and that would be bad. So what I'm going to do, I'll select these edges again, and I'll turn on snapping. And if you hold the Alt button, you can see that the snapping button changes so that we can activate the options. I usually keep these 3 selections on, and I would advise you to select these as well. These are just my go-tos. I'll use these other ones occasionally, but I tend to turn them off as soon as I'm done with them. But these guys tend to stay on at all times. And we're going to make use of this edge center snap right now. So we know that this is squared up around the origin. We know this is right in the middle because when we originally added edge loops around this, we created a uniform spacing between the edge loops that we added. So we could use this as reference. So I'll select these edges, hit W for move, and then make sure, and this is important, that you grab the move tool handle. It's very easy to grab anything else or just not select it, and then you can get sort of crazy things happening. So make sure you grab the tool handle. So I'm going to grab this, and then I can pull up here and snap to the middle of this edge, and I know that I'm perfectly centered here. And I'm off center for my drawing, but of course it's just a reference, so it's definitely better to go with reference or registration if you have it. All right, so I'm going to add another edge loop to make the top of this screen here. So I'll go to I'll go to add loop, and I'll just add a loop here, like so. That looks good. And now this edge is a little bit too low. This is the other edge we're going to use. So I don't want to mess with the curved profile of our product here. And so I have another method of moving this edge up. We could use an element action center like we did to move this edge down in the last video, but instead I'm just going to slide this edge up. Kind of like when we added this edge loop, we didn't really need to move it anywhere, it just sort of slid with the profile of the polygons. So you can activate the slide tool, and with that activated, let me just turn off snapping. You can just click and drag in the viewport and you can see your edge sort of slides up and down, and it doesn't mess with the profile of your shape. So in the front view, let's just slide this into place. Spacebar to drop the tool. That looks pretty good. Let's select these polygons like so. Control X, new mesh layer, Control V, and we'll call this screen. Enter. Great. Let's go back to the body. So there are three Thru-Holes. That's kind of hard to say. Up at the top, we've got a power button, a square hole for the channel switch, and then another hole on this curve for the antenna. So let's do the power button first. So select these three polygons here, making sure that the middle edge goes through to the top middle of our LED light. And I'm just going to hit, I'm just going to go to the radial align tool again. Click, and let's set this to 4.25. And go to a top view. Make sure that we're in place here. So I'm going to turn on snapping. You can hit X to turn on snapping. And I just want to make sure this is aligned here, like so. Cool. Spacebar to drop the tool. And I'm also going to grab these edges. You can see that we've sort of dipped down a little bit. We don't want that. So I'm going to move them up so they snap with this. That looks all right. Same with these. So I want this edge to align there, and that looks fine. All right, so I'm going to grab these polygons, hit B for bevel, and I'm going to bevel this in by 0.25. Hit apply. Spacebar to drop the tool. We're going to cut those polygons out, new mesh layer, paste, call this power button. All right, go back to the body. And now we got to do the square cut for the channel switch. So let's see, let's select these polygons. And if we go to a front view, you can see that we need to make this a lot wider. So we'll just scale this like so. Now my drawing has the channel switch a little bit left of center, but I want to keep it centered. So that looks good to me. I'm going to hit B for bevel, and I'll set this to 0.5, half of a millimeter again, and then I can just apply that value. Spacebar to drop the tool. We'll cut these polygons, new mesh layer, paste them, and we'll say channel switch. Great. Now it's time to do the antenna. So this one's a little bit trickier. Delete that edge. This one's a little bit trickier. We have to create a round on a rounded edge. And to do that, we're actually going to create a duplicate of the body. So pop into items mode and hit Control D to copy that mesh item layer. And we'll just hide the duplicate for now. Go back to the original, pop back into polygons mode, and select these 8 polygons here. All right, so we're going to do a rad, click once inside the viewport, of 6 millimeters. Let's go to top view. There we go. And I'll move this one up as well, but we're not gonna, we need to regain that rounded shape that we lost by using the radial align tool. So what we're going to do is use this duplicate of the body that we made. So to do that, we're going to set a mesh constraint. So go back to the basic toolbox, go to mesh constraints, set a background constraint, and set this to vector and double-sided. Okay, so now we need to move these polygons, but I want my move tool handles to be normal to this polygon selection. So I'll need an action center to do that. So I'll turn on action center and I'll select a selection action center. So now when I hit W, you can see that my tool handles are in fact normal to that selection. Let me turn off snapping here. So watch what happens when I grab this tool handle to move the polygons. You can see that they're forced to constrain themselves to the shape of the background or the duplicate of our body. Spacebar to drop the tool. Pretty handy, that mesh constraint. Make sure you turn it off because it will do strange things when you're working and you might not realize that a mesh constraint is the culprit. So put that on your checklist of things that can go wrong when you model. It's a good checklist to kind of develop because things always go wrong. You can go through and you're like, do I have a constraint on? Yes, no. Do I have a fall off on? Yes, no. Do I need to do a mesh cleanup? Yes, no. These are things that you can go through in your head before, you have to ask somebody for help. All right, so I'm going to turn off that body duplicate for now. Hit B for bevel. We've already got that 0.5 millimeter in there. I'm just going to apply that. Oh, I meant apply. Let's close these profiles. Apply. Spacebar to drop the tool. Control X. New mesh layer. Control V. That will be our antenna. All right, back to the body. The last cut we need to make is for the battery hatch, which is going to be in the back. So I'm going to select these polygons here. Oops, that was a very bad selection. Clumsy selection. Let's go to back view. I'm going to scale these out to fit about there. And I will move these up. It's okay to move these polygons. Why? Because we're on a flat surface here. We're not really messing with any profiles. Back. And then I want to scale this edge up to fit. So I could just select those edges and move it, but I'm going to drop my selection action center. I'm going to hit R for scale, turn on snapping, and I'll snap this top edge. So now when I scale, it's going to scale from my tool handles and pick up the bottom there. So that looks about right. Spacebar to drop the tool. Let's see, B for bevel. And it's kind of funny that I haven't explained bevel in this way before. We've done edge bevels and vert bevels, but usually people learn poly bevels first, which is kind of like an extrusion or a cut almost. It's everybody's favorite tool. You're going to use it the most. So I'm going to bevel this in negative 1.5 millimeters, which will be the eventual thickness of our product once we thicken it. And then I'll hold Shift and click to reactivate that bevel tool. And I'll bevel this in again, 1.5 millimeters. Spacebar to drop the tool. All right, so now we're just going to grab these polygons here. So this is actually where the batteries would fit. We're going to bevel this one in. B for bevel, click once inside the viewport to activate the tool, and we'll just drag these in. Let's see, let's go to right view. Negative 6.25. Perspective. All right, so that looks good. And there's one more through hole. I almost forgot. We have to cut out the push to talk button, which is on the left-hand side here. So let's select the polygons. Make sure you're in poly mode. And I will select these polygons. Again, my reference image does not line up perfectly. It's just there for reference. We'll hit B for bevel, click once inside the viewport, and give ourselves an inset value here of 1 millimeter. Spacebar to drop the tool. Control X to cut out those polygons. Let's create a new mesh layer. Control V to paste in those polygons. And we'll call this PTT for push to talk. Enter. And that looks pretty good. And that's all we're going to do for this video. So don't forget to save, and I will see you in the next video.